Welcome to Sweet Dreams Storytelling, where we unwind, relax, and drift into dreamland. I'm your host, Mike, and I'm so glad you're joining me tonight. Let's get cozy and settle in. Story for this evening is our adaptation of a beautiful novel by Charles Dickens, The Magic Fishbone. Chapter 1, A Royal Morning. In a very small kingdom, tucked between two mountains and bordered on the east by the Silver Pine Sea, there lived a king who was not quite like other kings. His name was King Watkins I, and although he had a crown, a scepter, and a royal seal, he also had a desk job. Unlike the majestic kings of neighboring lands who lounged in silken robes and summoned banquets at the snap of a jeweled finger, King Watkins woke each morning to the sound of a very ordinary alarm clock. At precisely 6 o'clock, it clanged like a frying pan being dropped on stone, and with a sigh and a stretch, the king would sit up in bed, rub his eyes, and prepare for another day at the office. He lived in a modest palace that looked more like a very large townhouse with slightly taller windows. The royal banner flew above it, though sometimes it drooped if the wind wasn't feeling particularly patriotic, and two sleepy guards leaned on their spears outside the front gate, each taking turns pretending not to yawn. Inside the palace, life was far from idle. King Watkins had 19 children, each of them delightful in their own peculiar way. Some were fond of books, others of insects, a few of musical instruments, though not always in tune, and at least 3 were firmly committed to becoming pirates when they grew up. The Queen, a quiet and dignified woman who favored shawls and chamomile tea, had passed away some years earlier, leaving behind a family full of love, noise, and very little money. The eldest of the royal children was Princess Alicia, a girl of 12 who had the grace of a queen and the patience of a saint. She rose earlier than her siblings every morning, tidied her room, checked on the little ones still asleep in their beds, and set about preparing breakfast, all before her father had even put on his boots. On this particular morning, the sun rose in its usual polite way, casting soft gold through the lacy curtains of the royal nursery. Birds chirped on the palace roof, pigeons cooed on the windowsill, and somewhere in the hallway, someone knocked over a coat rack with a clatter. Alicia barely flinched. "Breakfast will be in 15 minutes, she called cheerfully, tying her apron and lifting a pot onto the stove. "And if anyone has hidden marmalade in the harpsichord again, kindly remove it." There were groans, giggles, and the patter of feet as children woke and shuffled out of bed. Prince Clavius was already wearing his boots on the wrong feet. Princess Jane had wrapped herself in a curtain like a toga, and the twins, Patrick and Percy, were engaged in their ongoing philosophical debate whether socks were better than gloves. Meanwhile, King Watkins descended the stairs, still buttoning his collar and muttering figures under his breath. "Good morning, Alicia," he said, planting a kiss on her forehead as she passed him a steaming cup of very royal but slightly overstretched tea. "Good morning, Papa," she replied. "It's Tuesday. That means you're meeting with the Minister of Spreadsheets and a visit from the Postmaster General, who smells like peppermint." "Ah, yes," said the king. "And I misplaced my left shoe again. If any of your siblings are wearing it as a hat, please confiscate it at once." By the time the royal breakfast bell rang, a humble triangle suspended by string, the entire household was gathered at the long, slightly wobbly dining table. Each child had their favorite seat, though there were squabbles over the one near the jam, and Alicia served porridge with practiced grace. King Watkins cleared his throat. "My dear children," he began, as he often did, "we may not have golden goblets or roast peacocks like the kings in storybooks, but we do have each other and enough porridge for everyone who eats politely." "Except the cat," muttered Prince Thistle. "She stole my toast again." "Cats are exempt from table manners," Alicia said with a smile, scratching the marmalade-covered feline behind the ears. After breakfast, the children scattered, some to lessons, some to build forts from cushions, and the king set off for work, briefcase in hand, crown slightly askew. Before he left, he paused at the door and turned to Alicia. "Remember, my dear, if anything strange happens today, don't panic." "Of course not," Alicia said. "We only panic on Thursdays." The king chuckled and disappeared down the garden path, humming a slightly off-key tune. Alicia watched him go, her eyes thoughtful. It was an ordinary morning, a lovely one, in fact. She had no idea it would be the last ordinary morning for quite some time. For in the shadows of the sleepy town, fate was stirring its spoon in a much larger pot, and soon Alicia would find herself face to face with a most unusual destiny, wrapped in parchment paper and delivered from the corner fish shop. Chapter 2. Princess Alicia. If ever a child was born to rule a kingdom, though perhaps not one covered in gold leaf or unicorn stables, it was Princess Alicia. She did not wear a tiara every day, though one had been given to her at birth by a visiting aunt. It now lived in a shoebox under her bed, along with 3 old buttons, a broken locket, and a drawing of a dragon she had once dreamt of befriending. Instead of silks or satins, Alicia wore dresses she had mended herself, always neat, with clean hems and a patch or two that matched by design rather than necessity. Her shoes were polished each morning, usually by her own hand. What made Alicia extraordinary was not just her ability to solve arithmetic problems before breakfast or settle disputes between quarreling brothers with a single glance, though she could do both with ease, but the quiet force of kindness that followed her like a warm breeze. She was 12 years old, though even the king sometimes forgot that, mistaking her calm, thoughtful demeanor for that of someone much older. She was not loud, nor especially bold, but her words had weight, and her eyes, soft hazel with flecks of gold, seemed to carry the wisdom of someone who had seen all the world's nonsense and decided to straighten it out, one gentle act at a time. Alicia's duties were many, not because they had been assigned to her, but because someone had to do them, and she, being Alicia, simply did. Each morning, after breakfast, she checked on the household's SIP's minor catastrophes. This day she found that the pantry mouse had returned and eaten 3 raisins and half a biscuit. Baby Princess Minnie had posted all the spoons into the mail chute again. Prince Basil was crying because the pet turtle refused to wear the crown he made for it. The laundry had frozen on the line into what resembled a gallery of fabric sculptures. She handled each issue with her usual serenity. The mouse was politely but firmly asked to leave, and given a small slice of cheese to encourage its relocation. The spoons were rescued before the postman could mistake them for payment. Prince Basil was reminded that turtles were not by nature monarchists, and the laundry was hung near the fire to thaw with dignity. Once the morning was under control, Alicia turned to her more scholarly pursuits. She tutored her siblings in reading and sums, assigning them lessons with nicknames like spelling sword practice or arithmetic treasure hunts. She believed learning should be as much fun as climbing trees or building castles from old crates, and under her guidance, the palace echoed with both giggles and thoughtful silences. Yet for all her responsibilities, Alicia remained a child. She had secrets and daydreams, favorite books with pages worn soft, and a stuffed goose named Chancellor that sat quietly by her window each night. She missed her mother deeply, though she seldom spoke of it, and she sometimes gazed at the stars wondering if anyone up there noticed how hard she was trying. Despite the many duties of royal and motherly care, she had learned not to let sorrow harden her. In fact, she believed, though she'd never say it out loud, that the world could still surprise you even on the greyest of days. And it was precisely on one such grey day, while Alicia was in the market square buying sardines and a length of ribbon, that the world prepared to surprise her indeed. As she passed the fish shop, a squat building with crooked windows and the persistent smell of yesterday's lunch, she was stopped by a most curious sight. A woman in robes that shimmered like the inside of a seashell, perched quite calmly on a barrel of haddock. She had a pointed nose, twinkling spectacles, and a crown made of pearl-colored coral. A small cloud seemed to hover politely above her left shoulder. No one else in the market appeared to notice her at all. The woman looked directly at Alicia, and with a knowing smile beckoned her forward. "Princess Alicia, I believe you've been managing rather well," the woman said in a voice like a cello played softly in a garden. "But even clever girls occasionally require a little help." Alicia, who did not usually speak to strangers perched on fish barrels, gave a polite curtsy. "I don't believe we met, madam." "Oh, but we have, once when you were just a wish in your mother Sip's heart. I am Gran Marina, fairy of the sea, and patroness of practical magic." Alicia blinked. "A fairy?" "Yes," Gran Marina said, lifting a folded napkin from her lap. "And I've brought you something rather useful." She reached into her sleeve and pulled out a fishbone. Alicia, who had expected perhaps a wand or a jewel, or at least something that sparkled, looked at the object in mild confusion. "It's not just any fishbone," Gran Marina said, noticing her expression. "It's a magic fishbone. It will grant one wish, one and no more. But only if you have tried absolutely everything else. First, Do you understand? Alicia took the fishbone with both hands. It was surprisingly light and slightly warm to the touch. Do not use it carelessly, the fairy continued. And don't wait too long either. Use it when the moment is right, when your courage, cleverness, and kindness have all been tried and tested. Then, and only then, will it work. Before Alicia could ask a single question, Grand Marina stood, waved her hand, and vanished in a puff of salt-scented wind. The fishbone lay in Alicia's hands, ordinary as a kitchen scrap, and yet somehow humming with importance. She wrapped it carefully in the ribbon she had just bought, and placed it in the pocket of her dress, where it would stay safe until its moment came. She walked home slowly, mind buzzing. She did not yet know what trials lay ahead, but something in her heart whispered that the world had just changed. Chapter 3. A visit from the good fairy Grand Marina. It is an extraordinary thing to be given a magical object, but it is even more extraordinary to be given one quietly, without fanfare, by a woman sitting on a barrel of haddock. Princess Alicia returned from the market in a thoughtful silence. The bustle of the town passed her in a blur, vendors shouting their daily specials, children darting between carts, and the occasional donkey offering unsolicited commentary, but her mind was full of Grand Marina and the fishbone, nestled safely in her pocket. She did not know precisely what practical magic was, nor how one might go about using a fishbone to alter the course of fate, but she trusted the fairy. There was something in Grand Marina's eyes, kindness layered with centuries of knowing, that made Alicia feel safe, even in the middle of a fish market. As she reached the palace gate, she slowed her steps and looked up at the weathered stone. It was not a grand building, but it was home. Its chimneys leaned affectionately to the left, and ivy had taken up permanent residence along the western wall. In the upstairs window, one of the younger princes waved a jam-smeared sock like a flag. "Royal welcome party, I see," Alicia murmured, and smiled. Inside, the day had not been idle. The king had returned home early with a headache brought on by a long dispute between the Department of Royal Stationery and the Department of Very Important Paperclips. Prince Clavius had glued his shoes to the ceiling as an experiment, and Princess Jane was insisting that her tea party required actual tea, not warm water with marbles in it. Alicia, without complaint, slipped into her usual role, resolving quarrels, checking temperatures, reheating soup, wiping faces, and organizing an impromptu puppet show to keep the younger ones distracted while the king lay down. It was not until the house had quieted, just a little, just enough, that she finally had a moment to slip away to her room. She closed the door gently and pulled the wrapped fishbone from her pocket. It did not sparkle, it did not hum or glow or sing, it simply lay in her hand, light as air and shaped like a wish. With great care she placed it in a wooden box beside her bed, under Chancellor the Goose, and next to the worn copy of 7 Useful Things to Know Before Becoming Queen. Then she sat quietly. A knock startled her. "Come in," she called, expecting perhaps one of her siblings or a lost spoon seeker. But it was Grand Marina. She stood in the doorway, not looking as though she had just come through a door at all. Her hair was coiled like sea foam, and she wore a cloak the color of stormy water. Little silver fish darted through its fabric, as if swimming. She glided into the room with the air of someone who had never once been told she couldn't do something. "I thought you might have questions," she said simply. Alicia nodded. "Why me?" Grand Marina smiled. "Because you stirred not the sort of girl who waits for magic to solve everything. But I don't even know how it works." "You stir not supposed to," the fairy replied, sitting at the edge of the bed. "Magic isn't set for the lazy. It sets for the brave, for those who try everything else first. That sets why the fishbone is special. It isn't set a shortcut, it sets a reward." Alicia looked down at her hands. "And if I use it too soon?" "It will do nothing. Magic doesn't respond to panic or impatience. It listens to effort. It waits until you have done all you can, and only then does it lend a hand." There was a pause, the kind of pause that opens up around truth. Alicia looked up. "Will I know when the time is right?" "You will," Grand Marina said, with certainty, "though you may wish you didn't set." That answer sent a little chill down Alicia's spine, but she nodded. "I understand." The fairy stood. "Good.
Jenny.
Then my work is done for now. I still be watching, of course. We all are, but I won't interfere." "This is your story, princess." Alicia got up and curtsied low. "Thank you, Grand Marina." The fairy smiled. "Keep your courage clean and your heart steady." And with that, she disappeared. Not in a flash or puff of smoke, but simply by not being there anymore, as if the room had simply imagined her into being, and then gently let her go. Alicia sat on the bed for a long time after. She did not take the fishbone out again. She simply placed her hand over the box and closed her eyes. She did not know when she would need it, or what it would cost to wait. But she knew this: she would not waste the wish, not for her own ease, or comfort, or convenience. When the time came, she would use it not for herself, but for her family, for the kingdom, for something truly good. And until that time, she would carry on as always with calm resolve and clear eyes, ready to face whatever came next. Chapter 4: The Gift and the Warning. The next morning arrived the way most mornings do, by sneaking quietly over the hills and slipping through the windows before anyone had given it permission. But something about this particular morning felt different to Princess Alicia. Not in any obvious way. The porridge still bubbled in the pot, the youngest royal still refused to wear socks, and the palace cat still knocked a teacup off the dresser in her usual protest against breakfast delays. No, the difference wasn't in what was happening around her, it was in what she now carried within her. The fishbone, though it lay quietly in its wooden box beneath Chancellor the Goose, had become a secret weight in her heart, a small but powerful something that reminded her, you have magic now. Not a daydream, not a pretend spell whispered over dandelions, but real magic given by a real fairy with real consequences. As Alicia moved through her morning duties, she found herself thinking about it more than she liked. When Prince Basil refused to eat anything but jam, she considered for the briefest of moments, whispering a wish that all food could taste like jam, before shaking her head and giving him a firm stare that worked nearly as well. When a pipe burst in the pantry and flooded the kitchen floor, she was sorely tempted to run for the fishbone and beg it to patch the leak. But instead, she rolled up her sleeves, fetched a bucket, and fixed it herself. After 3 tries, 2 slips, and 1 brief encounter with a very surprised frog. Each time the thought came, wouldn't it be easier to wish it all away? And each time she reminded herself of Grand Marina Sip's words. Magic doesn't respond to panic or impatience, it listens to effort. That phrase stayed with her, echoing through the corridors of the palace like a wise old clock. She thought about it while scrubbing dishes, while teaching her siblings to read, and while mending the lining of her father's coat with thread that refused to cooperate. That afternoon, she found a moment of quiet and returned to her room. The box still lay where she had left it. She opened it gently. The fishbone, pale and smooth, looked up at her like a silent question. What did it mean to do everything she could? Where did her effort end and magic begin? How would she know when she'd done enough? She sat cross-legged on the floor, the box in her lap. "I'm not lazy," she said aloud, as if defending herself against the fishbone. "I just sometimes things get too big, too complicated." The fishbone did not respond. It merely lay there, unbothered, as if saying, "Yes, they do, and still you must try." Just then, the door creaked open. It was King Watkins. He looked unusually tired, with a furrow between his brows and ink stains on his cuffs. Still, his eyes softened when they met hers. "There you are, my dear. I was looking for you." Alicia quickly closed the box and smiled. "I was thinking." "Dangerous pastime," the king said, lowering himself into a chair with a groan. "What were you thinking about?" She hesitated. "About when to ask for help." He tilted his head, curious. "That Sip's a noble sort of thought, and a tricky one. Too soon, and you miss a chance to grow. Too late, and you may fall." Alicia smiled faintly. "That Sip's just it. How do you know when it's Sip's time?" The king thought for a long moment. "I suppose," he said slowly, "you ask yourself 2 questions. First, have I truly tried everything I can? And second, is this about me or someone else?" He rose to his feet and stretched, wincing slightly at a popping sound from his back. "And no wizard," he said with a wink. "But wisdom, I think, isn't magic. It's just the slow gathering of answers you didn't know you needed." He kissed her head and left the room, humming under his breath. Alicia sat in the quiet that followed, feeling both heavier and lighter all at once. She looked once more at the fishbone and whispered, "I still know when it sips right. I have to." Then she tucked it away again, wrapped in the ribbon, safe in its box. And so it was that Alicia came to understand the true condition of magic, not as a solution to laziness or a shortcut through challenge, but as a final light when every candle has gone out. And though she did not yet know it, the day would come sooner than she imagined, when the question would no longer be whether to use the fishbone, but whether she would be brave enough to wait one moment longer before she did. Chapter 5. Troubles begin. The troubles didn't start all at once. At first, they arrived the way a storm does when it's still far off. Small changes, strange breezes, uneasy silences, and then before anyone realizes it, the clouds are overhead and the rain is at your door. It began with one missed payment to the royal baker, who still brought bread each week out of loyalty and pity. Then came the unexpected tax notice from the Department of Unnecessary Correspondence, requiring King Watkins to pay a fine for overuse of exclamation points in his memos. The king, of course, had no time to argue. He was already working double shifts at the Ministry of Figures and Ledgers, where the chairs were uncomfortable and the tea always tasted like pencils. Alicia noticed the change almost immediately. At dinner, her father's jokes came slower, and the lines under his eyes grew deeper. Some nights he came home too tired to eat, sinking into the old red armchair and staring at the fire as if searching for answers in its flicker. Alicia did what she could. She began stitching old clothes into new ones. She started making soups from clever combinations of potatoes, onions, and when she was feeling daring, one dried plum. She organized a make-do and mend club with her younger siblings, turning missing socks into mittens and unraveling sweaters into scarves. She did not complain. She did not sigh, but she began to worry. The palace, though still full of laughter and children's noise, had started to feel colder. The firewood supply was shrinking, and the last delivery of coal had mysteriously failed to arrive. The royal umbrella leaked. The ceiling in the pantry developed a drip that liked to land, with remarkable aim, in the sugar bowl. Worse still, the younger children began falling ill. At first it was nothing more than sniffles and fevers, but soon coughing echoed down the corridors like a metronome of worry. Prince Toby, who usually climbed everything not nailed down, lay curled under blankets with flushed cheeks and glassy eyes. Princess Minnie stopped singing to her dolls. Alicia worked day and night to nurse them. She brewed teas of ginger and lemon, read them stories, and made damp cloths into tiny caps of comfort. Her own sleeves were often wet with tears, some theirs, some her own, but she never let anyone see her cry. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the hills in streaks of weary pink, the king returned home carrying a letter. Alicia met him at the door. She took one look at his face and knew it was bad news. "It sits from the royal bank," he said, voice low. "They sit, calling in the old debt, the one from when your mother was ill." He sank into the chair. His crown sat in his lap instead of on his head. "We have until the end of the month to pay, or they seize what they can." Alicia stood perfectly still, her hands folded in front of her. "How much?" she asked. He told her. She didn't blink, but she felt it in her chest, the pull of the fishbone, the whisper of the box under her bed. Now, her heart said, now would be a good time. But her mind whispered back, "Not yet, not unless you're sure." And Alicia, even in the face of debt and illness and her father's sagging shoulders, knew she wasn't sure. Not yet. There was still more she could try. There had to be. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Alicia crept to the nursery. She sat by Toby's bed and took his hand. It was small and warm, too warm, and his breathing was shallow. She didn't cry, but she came close. Then she rose, walked back to her room, opened the box, and looked at the fishbone. It gleamed faintly in the moonlight, not brightly, not magically, just waiting for her to make the right choice. She closed the box again. "I shalt do more," she whispered. "I shalt find a way," because she was Princess Alicia, and she had not yet done everything she could. Chapter 6. Alicia's Responsibilities. Princess Alicia had always been a girl of many responsibilities, but in the days following the letter from the royal bank, those responsibilities grew heavier, like stones tucked into her apron pockets. Each morning began before sunrise. While the sky was still the color of ink, Alicia lit the kitchen stove, warmed water for the baby's baths, stirred porridge, and folded yesterday's laundry with one hand, while writing out arithmetic questions with the other. She could now recite her siblings' favorite lullabies backward and knew precisely how many coughs a child could make before a teaspoon of honey must be administered. If the palace had run on gold, it would have long since collapsed, but it ran on Alicia, on her soft-spoken leadership, her quiet ingenuity, and the unwavering belief that even in the coldest of winters, something good could still grow. She kept charts of everyone's sep's health in a ledger, tracking coughs, sniffles, and energy levels with tidy symbols. She created a new meal plan based on the remaining stores in the pantry, stretching beans and lentils with chopped carrots, and what she optimistically called spice arrangements. The king offered to help, but he was fading, wearied not by laziness but by worry and work. His cough had started to match the children's, and his shoulders stooped a little more each day. Alicia watched him closely, never letting on just how scared she was to see her father look so small. But Alicia didn't fold. She didn't cry. She made a plan. Alicia set us a 3-part plan for palace survival, written in tiny letters on a folded napkin under her pillow. Cut all unnecessary expenses. No more shoe polish. Mud is fashionable now. Cancel the official taster. No one's poisoning the porridge. Combine all royal birthdays into one monthly cake day. Earn new coin where possible. Open the front parlor for mending and tailoring. Sell illustrated fairy tales drawn by Princess Jane. Offer enchanted babysitting for noble families, no actual enchantments included. Keep morale high. Friday night story hour with silly voices. Crown a new royal hero of the day each morning. Whoever made the least mess or tied their shoes without help. Pretend everything is absolutely fine. Alicia launched the plan without telling anyone what it was. She simply began doing. She converted the front sitting room into a royal workshop, placing a sign in the window that read, "Buttons sewn, socks darned, hope repaired, inquire within." To her mild surprise, townsfolk began arriving. A baker needed a torn apron fixed. A shopkeeper brought in a wool coat missing 3 buttons. A nervous young man requested help repairing the hem of a dress he swore was not his, but Alicia didn't pry. She simply smiled, threaded her needle, and made the world neater, one stitch at a time. She paid her siblings with biscuits and hugs to help. Prince Basil became a remarkably precise ironer, while Princess Minnie declared herself button supervisor and wore a ribbon to prove it. Even the cat seemed to sense the importance of things and refrained from sitting on the thread. And all the while, the fishbone stayed untouched, waiting in its box. It whispered, now and then, not in words, but in the quiet suggestion that magic could solve so much. One wish, one breath, and she could make the cold disappear, the coughs stop, the debts vanish. But Alicia did not give in. She washed, she scrubbed, she traded old clothes for vegetables, and even bartered a hand-knit shawl to the Postmaster General in exchange for a delay on their overdue letters. Still, it wasn't enough. The children's coughs lingered. The bank's letter now hung on her father's study wall, like a vulture with a wax seal. One evening, after scrubbing ink off the twins' faces and calming down an argument about whether dragons would like jam, Alicia sat alone in the quiet of her room. She looked out the window at the moon, which hung low and golden like a ripe plum. "I'm doing everything I can," she whispered. "But what if everything isn't set enough?" She looked toward the box, but she did not open it. Because though she was tired, so very tired, she hadn't tried everything just yet. There was still hope left, and where there is hope, there is work worth doing. Chapter 7. A Kingdom in Decline. The kingdom of St. Poxlington, a name far grander than the nation itself, was not large, wealthy, or powerful. It had no army, beyond 3 ceremonial guards who mostly waved, no gold mines, no enchanted forests, and only one official unicorn, who had retired several decades earlier and now lived peacefully on a diet of clover and mild applause. What the kingdom did have was a kind-hearted king, a resourceful princess, and a population that had grown used to managing with less. But there are limits to how long even the humblest kingdom can float above the waters of misfortune. And the waters were rising. The signs were subtle at first. The street musicians played slower tunes. The baker stopped putting sugar on his tarts. The cobbler began closing early. saying his tools had gone stiff in the cold, though it wasn't the weather he meant. People whispered in shops, behind newspapers, beneath laundry lines, whispers about the king, about the palace, about the money, about failure. The royal treasury, never a bursting coffer to begin with, now held only a few tarnished coins and a wooden token for one free loaf from a baker who had since moved to another kingdom. More troubling still, confidence in the crown had begun to dwindle. The townsfolk loved Alicia, they always had. But there was talk that perhaps the crown should pass to someone stronger, someone richer, someone with influence. It did not help that a neighboring baron, Lord Curdlebone, had begun showing an unusual interest in helping the people. He opened a grain shop, undercutting prices. He offered loans with generous smiles and sharp contracts. He hinted, ever so casually, that some thrones were simply inherited too soon. At the palace gates, food deliveries began arriving less often. The gardener stopped showing up. The royal gooseberry orchard was sold off in parcels to a traveling hedge magician. Worse, the illness spreading through the kingdom was no longer limited to Alicia's family. Coughs echoed in the village square. Fevers settled in the cheeks of blacksmiths' children and candlemakers' sons. The apothecary began charging twice as much, and soon only those with coin could afford what might help. Alicia saw it all. She watched the city dim, watched her people grow pale and weary. She felt it like a weight on her chest, and still she worked, teaching, sewing, comforting, selling, organizing. She made lists in her sleep. She counted coins until the numbers blurred. And yet, it wasn't set enough. The palace roof began to leak. The chimney in the east wing collapsed in a windstorm, and one morning the kitchen ceiling gave way entirely, sending a family of squirrels cascading into the flour bin. Still, Alicia did not reach for the fishbone. It sat in its box, silent and clean, like a match unlit. One evening, after an especially difficult day, a day in which the milk soured early, the youngest twins argued until bedtime, and King Watkins spilled tea on the last important document he owned, Alicia overheard something through the parlor window. Two townspeople stood just beyond the garden wall. "I hear the Baron's going to make a move," one said. "You think he sit really take the throne? If the king can sit pay his debts, the council may have no choice, and he sit's got gold, that one, and clean boots." Alicia froze. She waited for them to leave before returning to the kitchen, heart thudding like a quiet drum. That night she did not sleep. Instead, she sat in the nursery beside her siblings, listening to their shallow breathing, the rustle of blankets, the occasional sleepy murmur. She looked at them, all so small, all so full of dreams and scraped knees and bedtime songs, and she felt a rage stir in her, a deep, burning injustice that such innocence could be threatened by something as dull and cruel as debt. And yet, she did not cry. She stood, walked to her room, and opened the box. The fishbone waited, still and patient. Her hand hovered over it. But even now, she could not bring herself to use it. Not while there was still one last chance to fix things. Because something in her bones told her the worst had not yet come. And when it did, she would need the wish more than ever. Chapter 8. A decision deferred. The days that followed were leaner, colder, and heavier than any Alicia had known. The palace, once filled with music and mayhem, felt quieter now, like the echo of a song after it stopped playing. The laughter of her siblings had grown tired around the edges, like worn wool. Even the cat, once a fearless tyrant of tabletops, had taken to curling up under blankets, as if hiding from the air itself. And through it all, the fishbone waited. It sat in its box beneath Alicia's bed, still wrapped in its ribbon, unused, untouched, unforgotten. Every morning when she opened her eyes, she thought, "Is today the day?" And every night when she laid down again, aching in her arms, exhausted in her soul, she thought, "No, not yet." The pressure to use it grew stronger with each passing day. It came not from the fishbone but from the world around her, suggestions, hints, pleas, all wrapped in fear. The king had stopped going to the ministry altogether. There was nothing left to manage. His office had been quietly given to someone with fewer dependents and better shoes. He spent most of his time in the drawing room now, writing letters no one replied to. When he spoke to Alicia, it was in quiet tones. "Isette failed you," he said one evening. staring into a cold hearth. I should have prepared you for this. For ruling, for surviving, for being alone in a room full of people who want to take everything from you. You haven't it failed, Papa, Alicia said, gently adjusting his worn scarf. The world is just being very difficult right now. He chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That sip's a very royal thing to say. Whispers of magic. In town, rumors had begun to swirl, unsettling ones. That the royal family had hidden treasures, that they were hoarding food, that they had access to something unnatural. Alicia overheard two noble women whispering in the tailor Sep's queue. The princess never cries, you know, not once. Almost like she sits enchanted. Or like she sits holding on to something, some spell or charm. Why else hasn't set the family fallen yet? It struck Alicia in the gut, not because it was untrue, but because it was almost too true. She had something, a gift, a secret. And what was worse, she wasn't set using it. The urge to relent. That night, little Prince Toby had another fever. His cheeks burned. His small fingers gripped Alicia's hand like a lifeline. He mumbled nonsense, half dreams, half fears, and Alicia sat by his side, soaking another cloth, murmuring stories she barely remembered. When the fever broke, just before dawn, Alicia finally let herself sit still. The fishbone pulled at her thoughts like gravity. Why not now? What are you waiting for? She rose on quiet feet, stepped across the room, and pulled the wooden box from beneath her bed. She opened it. The fishbone gleamed faintly in the moonlight, the way hope sometimes does. Her hands trembled. She thought of her father, of the town, of her 6 siblings, and the debts, and Lord Curdlebone grinning with his gold teeth and his empty promises. She thought of Gran Marina and her words, "Only if you have done everything you can," and she paused. Because deep down, she knew something. She hadn't set, not yet. There was still one more idea, one more desperate plan, one more risk worth trying. Using the fishbone now would be giving up, giving in to the fear that she might fail. And Alicia had come too far, worked too hard, and hoped too fiercely to surrender. She wrapped the fishbone once more in its ribbon, and as the sun began to rise, painting the walls with the faint blush of new morning, she whispered, "Not yet, I shall find another way." Then she stood tall, tired, yes, but unbroken, and went to wake the children, already planning what she would try next. Because real magic, she had learned, does not begin in the wand or the spell. It begins in the choice to keep going, even when you could stop. Chapter 9. A Test of Courage. There is a difference between hope and foolishness, but only someone brave ever learns where the line truly lies. Princess Alicia stood at that line now. The palace was cracking, literally and figuratively. The ceilings dripped. The pantry echoed. The royal bookkeeping was now done with charcoal on the back of old envelopes. King Watkins was too worn to argue, the younger children too sick to protest, and the people of St. Poxlington had begun looking for a savior, and not necessarily one wearing a crown. Still, Alicia stood tall, because she had a plan. A wild, impossible, foolish little plan, and she was going to try it. The kingdom sets, debt, and the dragon of bureaucracy. Alicia knew that her father's debt was not just a number on paper, it was a story, a long one, tangled with sorrow and duty. The debt came from the time her mother had fallen ill, when doctors had been called from faraway lands and medicines were brewed in golden flasks. It was a cost the king had paid without regret, and never recovered from. Now the royal bank was calling it due, and Lord Curdlebone, glowing with polished wealth and oily ambition, was waiting in the wings, ready to relieve the crown of its burdens. Alicia had overheard enough to know what that meant. Her family would be quietly removed, the kingdom restructured, and the people, her people, left at the mercy of profit. She had one chance to stop it. She was going to raise the money herself. Not a few coins, not a sack of potatoes or 2 jars of plum jam, the entire amount. And she had 1 week to do it. The princess's market gambit. It began with a folded piece of parchment. Alicia wrote a single letter, addressed not to a noble or a merchant, but to the people of the kingdom, and nailed it to the town square's notice board. To the good people of St. Poxlington. A fair will be held on the palace lawn this Saturday. Goods will be sold, songs will be sung, skills exchanged. Come not with pity, but with pride. This is not charity. This is your kingdom too. Princess Alicia. The town stirred. At first, there was skepticism, then curiosity, then slowly, like flowers turning toward the sun, there was movement. Alicia coordinated everything with military precision. She transformed the overgrown palace gardens into a marketplace of miracles. She hung bunting made from old curtains. She convinced the town's best juggler to perform in exchange for a winter coat. She set up long tables where villagers could trade goods, bake pies or barter skills. She asked nothing for free. Instead, she offered what she had, the royal family's history, their hands, their honor. She sold heirlooms, old silver spoons, cracked teacups, faded portraits of ancestors with very dramatic eyebrows. She organized puppet shows performed by her siblings, who surprisingly gave moving renditions of the Great Porridge Rebellion. She arranged chess tournaments, sewing lessons, and storytelling corners. The town came, then they stayed. They brought not just coin but hope. For the first time in weeks, the people remembered what the royal family stood for, not wealth or spectacle, but steadfastness. They saw Alicia working the jam stand with flour on her cheek. They saw the king, though pale, helping set up chairs. They saw the palace cat wearing a knitted hat labeled official treasurer. And they smiled. The enemy watches. Lord Curdlebone watched from afar, standing beside his polished carriage and frowning as if he'd bitten into a lemon. A stunt, he muttered to his footman. She stole raise a few pennies. A pity she stalled have made a charming figurehead. But Alicia wasn't aiming to charm. She was aiming to win. The final night. As the sun dipped low after 3 days of selling and trading, Alicia sat alone on the palace steps, counting coins by lantern light. Her fingers were numb. Her apron was smudged with ink and jam and wax and flour. Her legs ached. But she didn't stop. 1 coin, 2 coin, 10 more. She counted everything, held her breath. And then she exhaled. They were short. Not by much, but short. A few dozen coins, that was all. So close, so heartbreakingly close. Her shoulders sagged, just for a moment. She had done everything, everything she could think of. Every ounce of effort, every drop of strength, every spark of imagination. And yet, it wasn't set. Enough. She looked up at the stars and let out a slow breath. Then she stood, walked back into the palace, and past the familiar corner of her room. The Fishbone sat, silent, as it always had. Now, Alicia thought, perhaps, now, Chapter 10, The Prince's Visit. On the morning after the fair, when the stalls had been packed away, and the last crumbs of pie swept from the palace steps, Alicia sat alone with her thoughts. The garden, once echoing with laughter and trade, was now quiet, except for the rustle of wind in the trees, and the creak of a banner that still hung, slightly askew, above the palace gates. The kingdom stands together. Alicia had done everything. Everything. And still, they were short. The final tally of coins sat in a jar beside her, mocking her with its nearness. A few dozen more, less than a bag of oats, less than a handful of silver buttons, and she could have repaid the debt. But she hadn't. She had come close, astonishingly close, but not enough. The Fishbone whispered from her room. But something else arrived first. A most unexpected visitor. A trumpet sounded faintly in the distance. Alicia turned toward the road, just as a grand carriage rolled through the village. It was not the kind of carriage used for groceries or slow-moving goats. It gleamed like polished bone and was drawn by 4 silver-maned horses whose hooves barely seemed to touch the cobbles. As the villagers gathered to watch, a tall figure stepped out of the carriage. His boots shone, his cloak swirled with tasteful drama. His sword looked ornamental but sharp enough to matter, and he was smiling. Prince Certain Personio of the royal house of somewhere very important bowed low. "Princess Alicia," he said, with a grin as bright as a chandelier, "I heard of your troubles, and I have come to offer assistance." Alicia blinked. "Oh," she said, after a pause. Certain Personio gestured broadly to his entourage, which included a harpist, a tea-bearer, and a personal mirror polisher. "Word of your courage has reached the northern kingdoms. Tales of a princess who sews, who teaches, who holds her kingdom together with twine and tea leaves. It's all very romantic. Alicia tilted her head. I didn't do it to be romantic. Exactly, he said, delighted. That's what makes it romantic. He pulled from his embroidered coat a small velvet pouch. The clink of coin inside it was unmistakable. Let me pay your debt, he said, as a gesture of goodwill, and possibly, if you are open to it, the beginning of something more. Alicia froze. It would be so easy. One pouch, one prince, one graceful thank you. No need for the fishbone, no need for further suffering, no need to stand alone, just one child in a world of collapsing roofs and unpaid doctors. But she studied his face. It was handsome, warm, even. His smile seemed sincere, but he had never been cold. He had never stayed up nights counting the price of flour. He hadn't watched siblings fade into fever, or carried a kingdom on shoulders still growing. And most of all, he hadn't stride. Alicia folded her hands. Your offer is generous, she said slowly, and I am honored by it, truly. Certain Personio brightened. But I must decline. His face flickered. I've come this far, she said. We've come this far. I haven't failed yet, not completely. I believe in finishing what I start, and learning from the end of it. The prince blinked. You would rather suffer than be rescued. She shook her head. I would rather earn my rescue. He looked stunned, then impressed, then grudgingly respectful. He bowed again, this time with more sincerity. You stir rare, Princess Alicia, rarer than most princes deserve. Then he turned and left, his carriage wheels whispering away into the dust. Still her kingdom. That evening, as the palace grew quiet again, Alicia stood in the nursery doorway and watched her brothers and sisters sleep. Their breathing was easier now. The coughs were fewer. The little ones had begun to laugh again, softly, at bedtime. The kingdom was not healed, but it was still hers. She turned toward her room. The fishbone waited. And now, finally, she knew. There was nothing else she could do. She had tried, failed, tried again, and grown in the failing. And now she could use the gift, not out of fear, not out of exhaustion, but because there was nothing left but the wish. Chapter 11. Plots and Whispers. In the days following Prince Certain Personio's visit, something began to shift, not in the palace, but in the air around it. The skies stayed grey longer than usual. The wind whispered longer through the hedgerows, and in corners of the town where no honest light reached, people began to talk. Not everyone had admired Alicia Sitt's efforts. Not everyone had clapped at the fair, or smiled at the sight of the children playing in homemade capes. Not everyone believed a 12-year-old girl should hold a kingdom on her shoulders. And one man in particular believed she shouldn't hold it at all. Enter Lord Curdlebone. Lord Curdlebone was the sort of man who smiled with his teeth and not his eyes. He had appeared in the kingdom nearly a year ago, full of gentle offers and generous promises. He owned banks, he owned mills, he owned more ledgers than friends, and he had watched Alicia's struggles with the calm, calculating gaze of a spider measuring its own web. Now, he made his move. He began with councils, secret ones. He met with ministers over heavy lunches, whispering words like stability, transition, and the future of the realm. He brought charts, he brought numbers, he brought wine. He did not speak against Alicia directly. He didn't have to. She's just a child, he say with a shrug, doing her best, of course, but how long can a kingdom survive on good intentions? His followers repeated his words in taverns and alleyways, in bakeries and at barbers. Soon people who had once clapped for the princess began to mutter, "She sits kind, yes, but is kindness enough? Perhaps it's 6 times someone more experienced took charge. At least Lord Curdlebone has money." The first demand. Then came the summons. A letter, sealed with black wax and pressed with the Curdlebone crest, delivered by a courier who didn't wait for tea. Alicia opened it in the quiet of the study. Her father sat beside her, eyes weary but steady. To Her Royal Highness, Princess Alicia of St. Poxlington. In light of recent fiscal failures and public instability, the Royal Council shall convene within 5 days to evaluate the fitness of the crown. Should this council find the current sovereign unfit to govern, It will recommend immediate transfer of authority to Lord Curdlebone until a suitable adult heir can be appointed. Your presence is required. Sincerely, the Royal Council of Assets and Stability. Alicia said nothing for a long moment. Then she folded the letter neatly and placed it on the table. The king sighed, rubbing his temple. I should have protected you from this. No, Alicia said softly. This isn't about me being a child. This is about him wanting the crown. She rose from her chair. We still fight it. With what army? The king asked, almost smiling. Alicia glanced toward the stairs, where the soft sounds of her siblings sleeping filled the halls like a lullaby. With the truth, she said. The quiet night before the storm. That night, Alicia couldn't sleep. She paced the hallways, checked on the children, and eventually stood in the moonlit kitchen, staring at her reflection in the teapot. The council would meet. She would be questioned, judged, possibly overruled. And Lord Curdlebone, powerful, rich, and cunning, would be ready. She wasn't afraid of him, but she was afraid for what his victory would mean, not just for the crown, but for the spirit of the kingdom itself. Because Curdlebone didn't believe in communities. He believed in ledgers. He didn't understand how kingdoms were not built on silver and taxes alone, but on love, loyalty, and the quiet courage of ordinary people who keep going. Alicia turned and climbed the stairs to her room. She opened the wooden box beneath her bed. The fishbone lay inside, waiting, as it always had. And finally, Alicia felt the stillness settle in her chest. She had tried everything: strength, creativity, humility, bravery. She had rallied the town, held off disaster, stood up to a prince, carried her family. And now, her kingdom itself stood on the edge. Her hands did not tremble as she reached into the box. Not yet, she told herself. But soon, the time was nearly here. The wish was almost ready. Chapter 12. Alicia's Cleverness. It was the coldest morning in memory. The sky was a dull iron grey. The wind seemed to be holding its breath. Even the pigeons in the town square had decided to stay home. Inside the palace, the royal family rose early. Alicia dressed with quiet precision, her dress freshly mended, her boots brushed clean. A small, worn ribbon held her hair back, and in her pocket, beneath layers of thread and calm resolve, rested the fishbone, still wrapped in its faded blue silk. She didn't know what the council would decide. She only knew what she would do. The gathering of power. By mid-morning, the royal hall had been transformed. Chairs had been set in rows for the council. A long table groaned under piles of parchment, ink pots, ledgers, and a tray of lemon biscuits that no one touched. Velvet ropes separated the audience from the dais where Lord Curdlebone stood, already practicing his victory smirk. He wore a fur-trimmed coat and a ring on each finger, none of them sentimental. Around him stood his supporters, bankers, functionaries, opportunists. Alicia entered quietly, alone, heads turned. She walked slowly through the room, the only sound her steady steps on the tiled floor. She climbed the dais without stumbling, though her legs felt like sticks. The king sat beside the council, silent, pale, his eyes following his daughter with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. The head of the council stood. We convene today to determine the future of this kingdom, he said solemnly. A decision must be made, whether the crown shall remain in the hands of King Watkins I and his heir Princess Alicia, or be temporarily transferred to the stewardship of Lord Curdlebone in the interest of national stability. Lord Curdlebone stepped forward, folding his hands with mock modesty. I wish only to serve the people, he said smoothly. This kingdom needs guidance, not daydreams. It needs accounts, not lullabies. He turned to Alicia, his voice honeyed. And though I admire your effort, Princess, it's time to let the adults take over. Murmurs rippled through the room. Some people nodded, others frowned, a few looked away. The head of council looked to Alicia. Princess, you may speak. The princess speaks. Alicia didn't speak right away. She looked at the crowd, not at the council, but at the people beyond the ropes. Tailors, bakers, lamplighters, bookbinders, children in patched coats. People who had come not to see a spectacle, but to see what hope might look like in the flesh. Then she began. Your honors, she said, her voice steady. I know I am young. I know I cannot wave a wand and solve every problem. I cannot turn bread into banquets or debts into blessings, but I know what this kingdom needs. She took a breath. It needs someone who will not give up when things get hard. Someone who will listen, who will work beside you, not above you. Someone who knows what it means to wake before dawn and scrub floors, to stretch a single coin over 3 meals, to comfort a coughing child while counting shillings in her head. She stepped forward. You speak of ledgers, I speak of people. She gestured toward the villagers in the back. They came to our fair, they traded what they had, not because they were told to, but because they believed in each other, in the idea that we could build something better, not just for the rich or the powerful, but for everyone. A pause. Do you want a ruler who governs with gold, or one who governs with grit? The room was silent. Even Curdlebone for once had no words. The sabotage. But power rarely gives up its grip easily. Curdlebone, seeing the mood shift, raised a hand. If I may, he said, voice clipped, I have here a document signed by the Royal Bank. It confirms the debt remains unpaid. Regretfully, that means the royal household has failed to meet its obligation. According to Council Charter 17, subsection B, the crown may be transferred in cases of default, finished the councillor grimly. Alicia felt the air go thin. She had spoken her truth, won the hearts of the room. But the law still loomed. 1 coin short, 1 breath away from ruin. The decision hung in the air, and at that very moment, a gust of wind blew open the great hall doors. The room turned. A figure stepped in, cloaked in silver and sea light. It was Gran Marina, and in Alicia's heart, she heard the quietest voice. Now, Chapter 13, A Dark Night. The wind swirled through the open doors like a breath long held and finally released. The members of the Royal Council stood frozen, their mouths halfway to questions they would never ask. Villagers gasped. Lord Curdlebone's carefully arranged hair lost its balance, and at the center of it all, Alicia stood very still, her eyes locked on the woman who had just stepped into the great hall. She looked exactly as Alicia remembered, elegant, ageless, radiant, not in a blinding way, but in the soft sea-glow shimmer of something deep and wise. Her cloak moved like waves. Her smile was quiet and vast. It was Gran Marina. She said nothing at first. She simply walked down the aisle of the hall as though it belonged to her, which in a way it did, or at least she belonged to the truth, and the truth had come knocking. She stopped before Alicia and bowed her head just slightly, as one sovereign might to another. Then she spoke, not to the crowd, not to the council, not even to the king. To Alicia, you have done what few rulers, young or old, ever manage, child, she said. You have waited, you have worked. You have suffered and sacrificed. You have resisted the easy road, and now your time has come. Alicia Scepter's hand slipped into her pocket. She pulled out the small wooden box. The room watched, silent, breathless, as she opened it and removed the object within, small, pale, and unremarkable to anyone who didn't know better. Just a fishbone. But to Alicia, it was the last card, the final arrow, the key to everything. Gran Marina nodded. Say your wish, Alicia. And so, standing before her people, her enemies, her council, and her future, Alicia took a breath and whispered, Let my kingdom be healed. The wish unfolds. The moment she spoke, the air shifted. It was not thunder or lightning that followed, no fireworks or fanfare, but a hush, a deep, warm hush that settled into every corner of the hall and spread like spring sunlight through a cold house. The walls brightened, dust vanished, cracks filled. The broken chandelier above the council table shimmered, reassembled itself, and flickered a light for the first time in years. Outside, the frost lifted from the streets. Chimneys that hadn't smoked in months came to life. The wind turned from biting to brisk. Windows glowed with sudden firelight. Inside the palace nursery, the children stirred, their fevers broken. In the treasury vault, once home to 2 coins and a very confused beetle, rows of gold bars now gleamed modestly, but unmistakably. Even the kitchen cat, who had been nursing a limp for a week, leapt onto the windowsill with the poise of her younger years. Alicia felt it too, not in her bones, but in her heart, the lifting, the lightening, the sense that everything had at last caught up with her belief. A reckoning for Curdlebone, Lord Curdlebone stepped backward, eyes wide. This is unauthorized magic, he stammered. This is irregular. You can sit just fix everything with a wish. Grand Marina turned to him, not unkindly. No, she said, you can sit, but she didn't sit. She fixed what she could without it. This was just the last stitch. Curdlebone's followers murmured, uncertain. Some slowly backed away. One or two bowed to Alicia. The council too stood. One by one, they turned not to the Prince of Gold, but to the Girl of Grit. The king, silent for so long, finally stood beside his daughter. He took her hand. We never needed a savior, he said, loud enough for the whole hall. We had a leader all along. The afterglow. The rest of the day passed in wonder. The kingdom buzzed with a joy it hadn't known in years. Debts vanished. Fields warmed. Medicine was delivered where it was needed, quietly and efficiently, not by magic, but because the systems now worked, honest and clean. Grand Marina disappeared as quietly as she had come, leaving no footprints on the carpet, only a faint smell of sea air. And the fishbone, gone, dissolved into the air, used and used well. But Alicia didn't miss it, because now, the magic was not in the object. It was in the kingdom, in her people, in herself. Chapter 14. The Fairy's Blessing. Magic, real magic, is not just a flash and a fix. It is a door opened, a burden lifted, a path cleared, but never the walk itself. That, as always, must still be done by the feet of those who live in the world they've wished to change. In the days following Alicia's wish, the kingdom of St. Poxlington did not become a fairy tale. It became something better, livable. The air softened, the illnesses passed. The skies, which had grown so used to staying grey, remembered how to turn blue. Shops reopened, school bells rang again, and the old cobbler, who had once declared he would never laugh again unless his cat came back from the dead, was seen giggling by the fountain with his cat, who had apparently only been visiting relatives in the next village. But more than that, the people changed. Not into birds or beasts or ballroom dancers, into believers. Believers in quiet courage, in the power of one voice speaking, when it would have been easier to stay silent. Believers in Princess Alicia, not because of the magic she had finally used, but because of the 1,000 hard things she had done before it. The return of Grand Marina. One evening, after things had begun to settle and laughter no longer sounded like a surprise, Grand Marina returned. This time, there was no windstorm, no open doors, or dramatic entrances. She simply appeared in the rose garden, sitting on the edge of a fountain, and feeding crumbs to a squirrel who looked mildly enchanted. Alicia found her there after sunset, drawn by something she could not name. I wondered if I'd see you again, she said, softly. I never left, Grand Marina replied. I just stopped being obvious. They sat together in silence for a while. The squirrel finished its meal and bowed, quite formally, before scurrying off. Then Grand Marina turned to Alicia. You did well. Alicia looked at her hands. I waited, I worked, I hoped, but I still needed the wish in the end. Of course you did, the fairy said. The point was never to do everything without help. The point was to try everything before asking for it. She placed a gentle hand on Alicia Thick's shoulder. You didn't use the wish to escape. You used it to finish what couldn't be finished alone. Alicia looked up at her. Will there ever be another wish? Grand Marina smiled. You will have many, some in the form of friends, some in the form of time, some in the form of second chances, but no more fishbones. That kind of magic is rare. A pause. You don't need it anymore anyway. A gift returned. Before she left, Grand Marina reached into her cloak and withdrew something small. It was not shiny, it was not gold, it was a simple spool of thread, deep blue, the color of midnight. What is it? Alicia asked. A reminder, Grand Marina said, for mending things, cloth, hearts, kingdoms, the kind of magic you already know how to use. Then she vanished, the way dusk vanishes, not gone, but slowly folded into something quieter. Alicia tucked the thread away in a drawer. She didn't need it now, but she would one day. The kingdom heals. The royal council, suitably humbled, rewrote several laws. Council Charter 17, subsection B, now included a clause about acts of restorative bravery. Lord Curdlebone, finding his influence shriveled and his accounting ledgers mysteriously turned into poetry journals, took a long vacation to a remote island where no one cared who he was. The king Set's health returned slowly, like spring. He resumed his duties in moderation and stopped referring to paperwork as the true villain of this tale. And Alicia, 12 years old, wise beyond reason, weary and wonderful, was no longer just a princess. She was something more, not a queen, not yet, but a leader, a legend, a light. And the people followed her, not with fear or duty, but with love. Chapter 15, Justice Restored. Justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't always trumpet its entrance. Sometimes it walks in quietly, takes a seat at the head of the table, and begins to ask questions no one expected to answer. In the weeks after Alicia's wish, as the kingdom warmed and the wind softened, people began to remember what had nearly happened. They remembered the hunger, the doubt, the fading of joy. They remembered the coins counted too slowly, the nights too cold, and they remembered, most of all, the man who had nearly taken everything from them behind a veil of gold and good intentions. His name, Lord Curdlebone, and his time had come. The trial of a tidy tyrant. The royal council, newly reformed and suddenly very invested in public opinion, announced a formal inquiry. Alicia insisted it not be a display of punishment, but of truth. If we set a rule with justice, she said, we must also judge with it. The inquiry was held in the great hall, where the floor had been scrubbed, the curtains repaired, and the chandeliers polished until they sparkled like daylight. Lord Curdlebone was summoned, not dragged, not shackled, but invited, with the dignity he had always demanded for himself. He arrived dressed as finely as ever, but with far fewer admirers. His entourage had dwindled to one valet and a parrot that kept shouting, "He did it," at inopportune moments. The council questioned him gently at first, then thoroughly. They asked, why had he sought power under the guise of debt resolution? Why had he pressured the council to bypass the crown? Why had he acquired half the kingdom's farmland while publicly claiming to support rural self-sufficiency? Curdlebone answered, but poorly. He spoke of efficiency, strategy, and long-term consolidation. The people in the audience frowned. Alicia said nothing until the very end. Then she rose and asked only one question. Did you ever plan to give it back? The silence that followed said more than his reply ever could. A fair but firm sentence. Curdlebone was not exiled or imprisoned. Alicia believed in restoration, not revenge. Instead, he was stripped of his titles and estates and made Minister of Ledgers and Spoons, a small but honest office in the furthest wing of the palace, where he would catalogue, file, and track all public resources for the next 10 years under strict supervision. Let him count things, Alicia said. He always liked counting, now he can count for everyone else. He protested, of course he did. But in the end, he bowed. And somewhere between spoons and receipts, he might one day learn something worthwhile. A new council. The old council, many of whom had stood by too silently, were invited to step down with full pensions and thank you cakes. In their place, Alicia helped form a new council, one that included a teacher, a baker, a former gardener, a mother of 6, the town SIP's oldest blacksmith, who once fixed a wagon with a soup ladle. The people cheered. It was the kind of council that remembered birthdays, shared tea, and knew what a kingdom felt like, not just what it owed. A kingdom rewritten. Laws were changed. The emergency succession charter was rewritten to ensure no child ruler could be ousted without public vote. Alicia's market fair was turned into an annual holiday called Founding Day, when no one paid for anything, and kindness was the only currency allowed. And in the heart of the palace, where once sat a cabinet of dusty scrolls and unread declarations, a new plaque was placed, engraved with words Alicia had spoken during her trial. We do not need the richest to lead us. We need the ones who care the most, and who will not stop trying. Justice, Alicia learned, does not mean punishing the past. It means protecting the future. And as she watched her kingdom begin again, stronger, fairer, lighter, she knew the fight had been worth every bruise, every hour, every aching moment. The wish had worked, but what came after the wish, that was up to her. Chapter 16, A Royal Engagement. The hard part was over. The fires had been put out, the walls mended, the debts erased, the greedy humbled. The kingdom, once hanging by a thread, now stood on firmer footing than it had in years. But Alicia knew healing wasn't a moment, it was a motion. It was what happened after the crown had been saved, after the magic was used, after the fairy vanished and the fishbone was gone. It was in a way the most important part, the work of peace. In the months that followed, Alicia got back to work, not the work of battle or speeches or saving the day, but the quiet, slow, necessary work of governing. She rewrote school charters to include lessons in compassion and cooking. She helped open a night clinic for the sick. She revived the royal garden, not just with roses, but with vegetables, so that the palace could supply food to the village year-round. She turned part of the old ballroom into a community library and the dusty cellar into a warm shelter for those with nowhere else to go. She held listening days where anyone in the kingdom could come to speak, not to plead, but to propose. She wanted her people to be part of the kingdom, not just citizens under it. One baker suggested an annual pie contest. Alicia approved it immediately. The prince returns. It was during one of these listening days, Alicia halfway through a discussion about rain barrel distribution, that he returned. Prince Serene Personio. He arrived quietly this time. No trumpets, no grand horses, just a travel-worn cloak and a small bouquet of winter violets in his hands. He waited patiently in line with everyone else, offering his seat to an old woman with a goose and nodding politely to a child with a too large crown made of cardboard. When at last he stood before her, Alicia raised an eyebrow and smiled. "I was wondering when you said come back. I had to be sure you didn't need saving," he said, offering the flowers. She took them, and "I discovered you saved yourself and your kingdom, and possibly half the council." She gave him a look. "And what do you want now?" His smile softened. "To offer something, not a kingdom, not money, just me, if you sit like it." There was a long pause. Then Alicia nodded. "Yes," she said, "but I set not done building this place." "I didn't sit come to build it for you," he replied. "I came to build it with you. A partnership, not a rescue." Word of the engagement spread slowly at first, because Alicia did not announce it with fireworks or royal banners. There were no choreographed dances or golden goblets, though there was cake, because she firmly believed all good things should include cake. Instead, the people learned the way all good truths travel, quietly, honestly, with warmth. They didn't cheer because she had married a prince. They cheered because she had chosen someone who believed in her, and in them, and in the kind of kingdom they were making together. A kingdom that did not require saving, only tending. And so, Prince Serene Personio stayed, not as a hero, but as a partner. He helped repair fences and fix roofs. He taught music to the palace children. He brought Alicia tea when she forgot to eat. And when the children grew restless, he showed them how to turn old maps into paper boats. He never wore a crown, but he wore his love for Alicia plainly, in every quiet gesture. Spring again. By spring, the trees in the orchard were blooming again. The laughter of the people returned, not as a miracle, but as something earned. The kingdom no longer whispered of change, it lived it. And Alicia, still only 12, but far older in wisdom, stood in the garden one morning, watching the sun rise over a land she had saved, not with one wish, but with 100 choices. She held her hands to the light and whispered, mostly to herself, "This is what we were meant to build." Chapter 17. A royal engagement. A kingdom rejoices. It was not declared a holiday, not officially, at least. But when word spread that Princess Alicia would address the people from the palace steps, the town gathered anyway. Shopkeepers closed early. Bakers laid out trays of spiced buns. The town cobbler wore his finest mismatched shoes. Even the clock tower, unreliable at best, managed to chime precisely at noon. It had been months since Alicia used the fishbone. Months of rebuilding, reimagining, renewing. The kingdom wasn't perfect, but it was possible again, and that was more than anyone had dared to dream the year before. And now, the people wanted to thank her. The girl who never asked for a throne. Alicia stood on the palace balcony in a simple gown, her hair bound with a thread of silver ribbon. She looked out across the courtyard, where children perched on shoulders and neighbors shared shawls. Behind her stood her father, King Watkins I, a hand resting gently on her shoulder. Beside her stood Prince Serene Personio, not in velvet, but in a soft blue coat with a teabag in one pocket and a handkerchief in the other. The people didn't cheer at first. They stood in silence, not out of fear, but reverence. Then, like dawn rising over rooftops, came the sound. Clapping. First slow, then steady, then thunderous. They clapped not because Alicia had power. They clapped because she had used it with grace. The quiet coronation. There was no crown, not yet. Alicia was still young, and her father still sat the throne, but as he stepped forward, he held something in his hands, a small sash, stitched with the colors of the kingdom and the royal seal, not gold, not velvet, but soft blue linen. He placed it over her shoulder. "This is not a title," he said. "It is a trust." "This is not an ending," Alicia replied. "It sips a promise." Together, they turned to face the crowd. The people did not chant, they did not kneel, they simply stood with her, shoulders square, heads high, as one kingdom. A woman in the crowd called out, "Long live Princess Alicia." And this time, they did cheer. Not out of duty, out of love. The celebration that followed. That evening, the town erupted in joy. There were firecrackers in the square, safely supervised by an overly cautious uncle. Music spilled from every corner, some in tune, some not. Children played tag in the lamplight, and older folks danced in sensible shoes. Alicia joined them, not as a distant ruler. As one of them, she helped serve stew. She told a bedtime story to a tired toddler she'd never met. She laughed with a vendor whose wares she had once accidentally mistaken for hats. Prince Serene Personio played fiddle, badly, and no one minded. And as the stars filled the sky, Alicia sat beside the fountain where Gran Marina had once given her a spool of thread. She still kept it. Not for magic, for memory. The future begins quietly. The palace lights glowed soft and warm into the night. Inside, the children slept soundly. The king rested easier now. The council chambers echoed with plans, not arguments. And Alicia, future queen, watched over them all. Not with spells, not with swords, with something rarer, a heart full of ordinary, extraordinary hope. Chapter 18, A New Beginning. Stories like this often end with a coronation, with a crown lifted high, a throne gleaming in the sun, and banners waving like excited hands. But Alicia's story did not need such an ending. It had already begun something far better. The kingdom she built. St. Poxlington was not the grandest of kingdoms, nor the richest, nor the most famous. It did not host glittering tournaments, nor did it possess dragons, tame or otherwise. Its palace had a leaky window. Its treasuries, while now stable, still contained more ledgers than jewels. But it was a good place, a kind place, a place where people helped each other before being asked, where meetings opened with tea, where laws were rewritten in plain words, so all could understand them, and where a girl, 12 years old when her trials began, had taught an entire kingdom that leadership was not about strength, but steadiness. The Fishbone remembered. The magic Fishbone was gone. It had vanished the moment Alicia made her wish, melted, perhaps, into the fabric of the world, or tucked back into the pocket of whatever quiet fairy magic oversees such things. It had not granted endless riches. It had not defeated her enemies or erased her sorrow. All it had done was respond to a girl who had done everything else first. And that was enough. Sometimes, when Alicia walked alone in the gardens or visited the town by herself in a plain cloak, she would touch the place in her coat where the ribbon once lay, and she would smile. Not because she missed the magic, because she no longer needed it. Legacy in small things. Years passed, seasons turned, the kingdom thrived. Alicia grew, and so did her people. She was never a ruler of distance. She listened more than she spoke. She asked questions others were too proud to ask. She valued ideas from quiet corners. And she never forgot what it was like to feel powerless, or tired, or small. She never forgot that some kingdoms are not saved by armies, but by one person deciding to keep trying when it would be easier to give up. The end and the beginning. On the wall of the palace library, where children now came each week to read and learn and nap in sunny corners, there hung a small frame. Inside it, under glass, was a ribbon, the blue one that had once wrapped a fishbone. No plaque, no inscription, just the ribbon. People often asked what it meant. The librarian smiled and said, "It's saps a reminder that magic is real, but effort is greater, that you are not too small to matter, that waiting for the right moment is braver than giving in to fear, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not give up." And so, the kingdom lived. Alicia led, and long after her story became a tale, and the tale became a legend, one truth remained. The girl who used a wish only after she'd used everything else gave her people the greatest magic of all. Not just a miracle, a future, the end. Thanks for spending this quiet time with me here at Sweet Dreams Storytelling. I hope you're feeling relaxed, peaceful, and ready for a restful sleep. As we say goodnight, let the calm background music guide you gently into dreamland. Before you go, don't forget to like the video and subscribe, and until next time, rest well.